Thank you so much for coming to Jack's celebration of life. Jack had an incredible life, and I feel so very lucky to have shared 47 years with him. For those of you who weren't able to join us, I'll share a few pictures of the beautiful space where it was held. We had a full house. And had to bring in extra chairs. Jack's friends signed his memory book at the registry table, which also contained the programs and beautiful tributes. One from Danny Miller, his filmmaker friend from his early days at Kent State, and another one from his grandson, Ricky Nurza, who first met Papa Jack when he was a young boy in the Philippines and later spent time with him each summer in Maine. Under the big photo screen at the front of the room was Jack's urn, surrounded by his published books. On the flowers next to Jack's picture was a beautiful tribute from the Welsh filmmaker Viv Mannering, who was one of Jack's closest friends. The memory boards featured Jack's wide range of performances, from a poetry reading in Dublin to his acting roles as Dylan Thomas and Richard Burbage and his programs on the environment. His books were in a window for his friends to take as a keepsake, a reminder of Jack and his enduring passion for poetry. Jack's paintings were displayed in the other windows, along with programs of shows that he was featured in. And now I'll start my slideshow presentation, which was displayed on the huge screen at the front of the room. We chose this location on the Ohio River because the river meant so much to Jack. As a poet, he was fascinated by the mystical nature of the river. From our home on the hilltop, he could experience the daily changes in the moods of the river. He was working on creating a book featuring his river poems. Jack grew up in Cuyahoga Falls, a suburb of Akron. As a young boy, he loved to read. He loved going to old bookstores and started writing poetry when he was only 10 years old. Jack felt the calling to be a priest and went to study at a Passionist Fathers Seminary. But the National Geographic was his downfall. In his sophomore year, a priest caught Jack looking at bare-breasted women, and he was sent home, back to St. Vincent's to finish high school. Leading a new mission in life, Jack turned his focus again to poetry. He was influenced by the oral tradition of the Irish master poets and wanted to help revive poetry as a performing art. He started reading at poetry events, and by the time he got to Kent State in 1964, he had developed a following. He became a member of the counterculture, reading and writing poetry and leading a rather bohemian lifestyle with many hitchhiking trips across the country, including Kent to Santa Cruz, then to Woodstock, and back to Eugene, Oregon, where he read at Ken Kesey's Poetry Festival. One of Jack's early publications was Burnt Almonds, his poetic version of the bombing of Hiroshima. Jack loved hanging out at Shelley's book bar with other poets and participating in poetry readings. His friend Jim Pomerini from the Shelley's crowd recently posted that Jack was the first poet to light me on fire with the possibilities of oral poetic performance. No one like him then, now, or evermore. Jack also loved the music scene at the downtown bars where his college friend Joe Walsh of the Eagles played with local bands, and his friends Jerry Casale and Bob Lewis started the new wave band Devo. After reading about Jack's passing, Jerry wrote, I loved Jack, a very deep soul and a frequent visitor to Bob Lewis's and my pot-laced philosophy sessions at our apartment above Guido's Pizza. He was one of the only guys that understood my gorge character and his holy card with the X-rated prayer. One evening, Jack was listening to Somewhere Over the Rainbow on the radio when an announcer interrupted with, Today that voice was stilled. Judy Garland is dead. Judy had died of an overdose of drugs and alcohol. Jack was stunned. He had grown up watching The Wizard of Oz every Halloween, and Dorothy's story was not supposed to end that way. His heart was full of sorrow as he sat down, and this poem poured out of him.
Celluloid Elegy for Judy. The pig-tailed killer of the Wicked Witch led Daddy's kids through Emerald City before she made it there herself, while Round John Virgin smothered the child, holy infant so tender and mild. In the silent night of Catholic childbirth, I was a starver, a server, a saint, but she was Dorothy of Yellow Brick Road, living her movie each Halloween, each aging Easter in Oz, Queen of Kansas, of Hollywood oiling her Tin Man thirst, the frightened cat of her heart screaming for years, a burning scarecrow, and no bucket wet enough in all of Oz until the wizard showed his sideshow hand. And you touched it, Dorothy. All polka dot and hunger, you rode his cure-all car through cheering munchkins, cheering, Long live Dorothy, and long live our John Wayne sham and ham-boned savior, our Dodge City gambler, and now I am scared out of my baby fat. At this point, at this scene, my altar bells ring, my ghost mask falls, my shopping bag full, I cry as I cry each year at this time. Dorothy, be careful. Look out, his fingers are needles, are lightning, his floodlights are thrilling, but he's Halloween's bad candy man, dealing the cards like Tombstone Tarot, like Lash LaRue, who holds no bluff for tin can hearts, who beats out your song on his Halloween porch, a Broadway magus with musical bones. Oh, Dorothy, your straw wanted real ones. Made in Oz, yes, but not by this wizard of nightclub bubbles, this junk man wizard of trick or treat, who stole the heels from your red slippers each year of my movie, each day of your story in Emerald City, in Oz, on the tail end of America's fairy tale.
And that's how I met Jack. I heard him read Celluloid Elegy at a poetry reading in downtown Kent and was swept away. When I talked with Jack afterwards, he told me he loved listening to Dylan Thomas, and then he recited several Dylan poems. I couldn't believe how much he sounded like Dylan. I told him he should do a one-man show on Dylan and that I would help him write it. After college, I had planned to move to New York to work in the theater, but I got sidetracked when I was offered a scholarship to pursue a PhD in math. So now I had a second chance to work in the theater. We began developing his Dylan Thomas show in 1978. After the great reception when it ran at Kent State, we decided to take it to New York. Jack's show first ran at the Royal Court Theater in Midtown Manhattan. It then moved downtown to the 13th Street Theater, which was run by Edith O'Hara. Edith liked Jack's show so much that she invited us to move into a small apartment above the theater. Edith often gave free tickets to schools. One evening, I was shocked when I noticed a group of very rough-looking teenagers arriving. I ran to the box office and asked Edith where they came from. Then I ran backstage to warn Jack that he had better give the best performance of his life because Edith had given free tickets to a group of juvenile delinquents from Harlem. It pushed Jack to a new level of performance. And he was able to captivate a group of troubled teens with Dylan's stories and poetry. When Edith needed a new children's show, I wrote a musical comedy called The Empire Laughs Back, with Jack as the Emperor of Funlandia. It was a very popular matinee. One of the highlights was when an audience of Lebanese girls ululated so loudly during one of Jack's songs that the roof of the theater seemed to shake. Even though Jack had no voice training, Edith encouraged him to audition for the lead role of Bunthorne in Gilbert and Sullivan's opera, Patience. Jack was delighted when he got the role, even though it meant he had to spend a lot of time taking voice lessons. The cast had the honor of performing for the Gilbert and Sullivan Society, and after the performance, the renowned writer Isaac Asimov shook Jack's hand and said, "You are the best Bunthorne I have ever seen." Jack was in a lot of other shows in New York, including A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, Taming of the Shrew, and Edward II. But his favorite role was as Richard Burbage in Will Kemp. Burbage was a close friend of Shakespeare and the star of his theater company. Jack read at a lot of poetry readings in the East Village, including St. Mark's and the Bowery Poetry Club, and at St. Clement's in Hell's Kitchen, which is where we moved after 2 years of living in the theater. Because of Jack's great reviews in New York, he was booked at the Odyssey Theater in Los Angeles. Jack got a fantastic review in Dramalog. But his favorite review in LA was when he received a handwritten card backstage which said, "I knew Dylan, and you did him proud tonight." While we were in LA, Jack's book, The Future Past, was published. It has some of my favorite poems, including Celluloid Elegy and The Bird Ladies. We then moved to Panama City, which was a convenient place for touring the country. Jack loved the theater, but he loved books even more. Since we had time in between shows, he suggested we open a bookstore. So we opened Flamingo Books and Performance Center. Jack hosted poetry readings and a children's theater on the weekends where he sometimes did puppet shows. And in the evenings, he taught creative writing at Gulf Coast Community College. We wanted to live in Europe for a while, so I took a job with a software company for newspapers. After working at newspapers in England for a year, we moved to Stockholm, where I worked at Sweden's largest newspaper, and Jack taught English as a second language and also worked at Ericsson's developing courses. After only 2 weeks there, the editorial staff at my newspaper took us on a cruise, and they were very surprised when Jack started talking with them in Swedish. He picked up languages very quickly. When we returned to America, Jack performed with the Chicago Medieval Players, did programs on English Renaissance poetry, and often read his poetry at the Green Mill, where he was a finalist in the Chicago Slam. In 1990, we moved to Hanover, where I taught at the college. Back in 1969, Jack was in the PhD program in English at Kent State when the Vietnam draft lottery was held. His birthday was number 25, which meant that he would be drafted, so he packed up his bags and moved to British Columbia. Now Jack had a second chance to complete his degree. We moved to Old Louisville, and Jack finally got his PhD in English at the University of Louisville. He taught for several years at Coastal Carolina University and then Hanover College, where he especially enjoyed team teaching American identity with his good friends John Martin and Dee Goertz, and literature, art, and music with Bill Butler and Kim Hollis. One of Jack's highlights at Hanover was playing the role of Prospero in The Tempest. When I was cleaning up in Jack's art studio last week, I was surprised to see that he kept a copy of the Tempest program next to his easel. Jack also enjoyed performing in and out of the garden with Kim Hollis and Melissa Eden. In the last stage of his academic career, Jack was delighted when he joined the English department at Indiana University Southeast and got to work and socialize with all his wonderful colleagues there for 14 years. He was very honored when he was selected to be chair. He especially enjoyed the programs and social events he and his colleagues had for the students. His academic papers included examinations of gender and the rhetoric of racism. Of special importance to Jack was his deep friendship with Nathan Montoya at the Village Lights bookstore. Their bond was rooted in their shared experience in Manhattan, Nathan in dance and Jack in theater, and their mutual appreciation for the arts. Jack loved going to poetry readings there. And he especially loved sharing his own poetry, bringing his words to life in the enchanting Mark Twain room. Jack also enjoyed collaborating with the renowned pianist Starla Rayleigh in a salon concert for all ages. While Starla brought the music to life, Jack captivated the audience as he narrated The Carnival of the Animals and the story of Babar, the little elephant. Jack always looked forward to Nathan's annual Poet Palooza events, where he connected with fellow poets and shared his work. Nathan hosted the launch of Jack's poetry collection, Eavesdropping in Plato's Cafe. Later, we will play one of the poems Jack performed that evening. Nathan also hosted the launch of Jack's historical novel, Turtle Island, A Dream of Peace. It tells the story of how Hiawatha, who was obsessed with revenge for the murder of his daughters, and the holy man Decanawida unite the 5 Iroquois nations and form the first democracy on the American continent, which was based on the principle of caring for Mother Earth and the well-being of future generations. Jack loves spending time in nature. Roaming around our 2 acres with lots of trees, flowers, and native plants. Jack had a very deep concern for the environment, which led him to collaborate with nature photographer Bernie Casper on the program Environmental Art on the Ohio River. We're focused on the beauty of nature and the great threats it is facing, hoping to inspire the audience to take action to preserve our planet. Jack was an active participant in Madison's theater and literary scene. He was featured in the River Run Theater Company productions of Under Milkwood and A Tribute to Dylan. In his performance of Body and Soul at the Madison Public Library, Jack read selections from poets who had influenced him, along with some of his own poems. He then performed the same program at the Bowery Poetry Club in New York. Jack's passion for creative expression extended beyond his poetry and performances. He loved playing his guitars, bongos, and wooden flutes. In his later years, he became passionate about painting and honed his skills through classes with local artist and instructor Russ Fosler. We are especially indebted to Jack's filmmaker friends who have played a vital role in preserving his legacy. Among them is Eric Marciano, whose friendship with Jack began during their early days in New York, when Jack had the lead role in Eric's cult classic film, The Age of Insects. Jack plays an insect-obsessed doctor who subjects a young delinquent to bizarre hallucinogenic treatments. Critics hail the film as the Citizen Kane of the underground. Jack was surprised and thrilled when it was selected by the Museum of Modern Art for their exhibition, Club 57, Film, Performance, and Art in the East Village, 1978 to 1983, and then archived in their permanent collection. Attending the MoMA screening was a highlight of Jack's later years. He described the event as a once-in-a-lifetime experience, celebrating not only his contributions to film, but also the vibrant cultural scene of the East Village when he was living there. Eric filmed Jack's documentary, William Blake, Inspiration and Vision, which won an Aegeus Award for Best Educational Film. Eric also filmed Jack's performances of Walt Whitman, Body and Soul at the New York Public Library and the Walt Whitman Birthplace Museum. And we are especially indebted to Welsh filmmaker Viv Mannering. Jack first met Viv at Kent State when Jack was a student and Viv was teaching in the art department. Their first project together was Viv filming Jack's one-man show on Dylan Thomas in Milwaukee. This was followed by a trip to England where Viv helped film In the Footsteps of Newton, which Jack narrated. The next year, we went back to England and filmed in locations tied to the lives of Wordsworth and Coleridge, including the Lake District, Nether Stowey, and Tintern Abbey. On our last collaboration, Viv traveled to Rome with us to film Jack's documentary, Ecstasy and Death, Keats and Shelley in Rome. It was screened at the Utopia Film Festival and other film festivals and is now available on YouTube. In part 2, Jack's introduction to Shelley's Ode to the West Wind demonstrates his exceptional teaching ability. It got glowing comments on YouTube.
Oh. I love Shelley. I love his poetry. I love his beautiful soul and his fine mind. I love the fact that he hated hypocrisy and he hated injustice, especially against the poor and the downtrodden. And you know, I love the fact that he recognized the genius of John Keats when most of the critics of the day, including Byron, dismissed Keats as an uneducated and ignorant cockney. Shelley was all air. He was an ethereal spirit communing with gods and goddesses and the spirits of the rivers and the trees and the mountains and the divine spirit of the wind. He wrote his famous Ode to the West Wind in Florence in the late October of 1819 during a long walk in the woods along the banks of the Arno, and a huge, fierce storm of wind and rain and hail rose up, and it excited his poetic imagination. The violence and of the transition between autumn and winter seemed to him to act as a revolutionary source that would benefit mankind in the coming peace of a symbolic spring. The physical storm and the metaphysical possibilities excited his poetic imagination, and he went home, and this poem poured out of him in a frenzy of inspiration.
After filming Jack's reading at the Keats Shelley House in Rome, we went upstairs and filmed in the bedroom where Keats passed away, which was a profound experience for Jack.
Some say that Keats was inspired to write his famous ode on a Grecian urn after seeing the Elgin marbles in the British Museum. Others maintain it was the Townley vase that inspired his poetic imagination. But you know, neither of these objects, as rich as they are, contain the wonderful detail that exists within the poem. In it, Keats describes a pagan ritual sacrifice in a small antique village on the side of a Grecian vase, where the town is emptied out of its folk, and they are all marching with drums and timbrels and wild ecstasy towards some pagan sacrifice. A lover tries to kiss a beautiful maiden, but she is loath to accept his advances. She will never be his, but she will always remain beautiful and desirable. Keats seems to say that art trumps reality by being forever new, forever young, forever unchanging. Ode on a Grecian Urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities or mortals, or of both in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loathe? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and trembles? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit, ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade. Though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs, forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love. Forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. All breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadest thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel is emptied of its folk this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. Oh, Attic shape, fair attitude with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and trodden weed, thou silent form dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity, cold, pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth. Truth, beauty, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know.
I would like to close with Jack reading one of his favorite poems. Jack was always fascinated by bones and the insight they provide into the origins and development of humans.
We don't often think about our skeletons, encased as they are by our flesh, but and our skeletons indeed may only see daylight sometime way in the future when an anthropologist may dig up our bones and try to determine who we were. But our skeleton is the superstructure of our lives upon which our entire being hangs. This poem is called 206 Bones. The skin that hangs from this skeleton is cloud stuff, tree limbs on a hilltop seen from a moving vehicle, ineluctable like foxfire in night wind, vanishing within seconds after sight. The tegument between these bones feels right, tightened to keep me strung high and low, cap a pay from waist to crown to toe, and then below all things connective like my Lord's own puppet all unstrung. Femurs found in a dig in Egypt, metatarsals uncovered beneath centuries of dust in Mesopotamia, and parts of a skull in a helmet in a river in England. All these things were once living and breathing, creation's transitive explosion of love, and here I still am in the middle of it all, alive and wondering how it all will end. The thigh bone connected to the hip bone connected to the love bone. Now hear the word of the Lord. Or is it Darwin? Why must we choose as if from a menu of entrees in the bistro of history? Garden of Eden or Olduvai Gorge? Cain and Abel or Australopithecus africanus? Noah or Homo erectus? Revelation or walking fish? Which or both or none? Can anyone judge or even begin to care? Too many questions without enough answers. This is the way it always must be. I can feel it in my bones, all 206 of them rattling around in a cage of flesh, bone house, brain house, sea road of muscle and fat, waving us on into infinity's mystery. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You can see more of Jack's poems and videos on the website and YouTube channel for Springwood Press. Please let me know if you would like to be notified when I post more of his poems. And when we publish 2 of the last books that Jack was working on. One is a children's book about Vincent van Gogh, and the other is his Book of the Dead, which contains elegies he wrote for family and friends and poems about dying and death, including the poem he just read, 206 Bones. Jack had a special kinship with his family and friends, and he left us with a legacy of beautiful memories. Our next speaker is Jack's dear friend from Hanover, Dee Goertz.
It's a daunting task to try to pay tribute and say goodbye to Jack Ramey. As you have seen, he was a brilliant poet and a brilliant performer. And so I chickened out and tried to write something of my own, and I'm going to use one of his poems as my tribute to him. I was paging through his books, and I found many, many beautiful meditations on death and loss and our mortality and what remains behind. And I found one in this book that you've already heard a little bit about, Eavesdropping in Plato's Cafe. It was written in 2015. I want to remind you of that. Almost 10 years ago, he wrote this poem I'm going to read, and I think it's uncannily appropriate for today. The title of the book tells you a little bit about what Jack's poetry is like, if you haven't already gathered that. It's an erudite body of work, but it's very playful in its learning. It digs into the very deepest questions, but in a way you would do with a friend at a coffee shop. The poem that jumped out at me today to read is called Poem at the End of a Deadly Year. How appropriate for the year we've just been through. How appropriate not for just the year in general, but for Nancy's life. This has been a tough time. But for this very moment in December, this is a December poem, and you can see the poet looking out over Madison, over the Ohio River, from the vantage point of Jack and Nancy's beautiful house on the hill. And it tells us about this dark December, but then it quickly moves into the rhythms of the universe and how the rhythms of the universe bring us things that sustain us, love and hope. Jack knew about love and hope from his 47 years with Nancy in their beautiful, collaborative, inspiring marriage. His poetry continues to be an inspiration to me because he is not afraid to contemplate that mystery of death that we all face. And his poems are a benefit to all of us. So listen with me to his words in Poem at the End of a Deadly Year, moving from loss to love. Closing in on the end of the year, night falling. Dusk settles like gray ash in a black wood stove as big as the universe. And I hear the cries of help, the burning cries of love, echoing on the hills of this valley. The bank plain swallowed whole by the mouth of the tide that takes in all, gives back all, eventually. The river moves toward the new year relentlessly as she must, as she does each cycle of the earth's revolution. My sister trees bend with the wind's instruction. They rebel not, they conform not, they simply do the will of her command as heavy clouds scud past them eastward. They blow westward toward the setting sun, their black limbs a fractal repetition of the endless pattern, the ultimate will of uncertainty, and a sure claim for futurity, for the indecision of our lives. The sky purples as the lights come on in the town below. The shaman tree keeps watch, her full crown green and blowing like saxophone dreams of yesterday and tomorrow, forever glowing in red heat, like a child's heart at Christmas, now looking for the born Messiah, but eager for presence, eager for hope blown from a horn not of this world. And the end of all this eager dreaming is this, a promise, a wish fulfilled, that we might live, so that we might die in such a way that we might live again and again. Again and again, or else eternally in some other guise, some other alter ego-ness, not Freudian or Jungian or Christian, Noel, oh hear the angel voices, but another promise, another eager wish fulfilled, that of nature's light come to surround all existence, come to shawl and shroud the precise persistence of love. Thank you.
The next speaker is Jeremy Wells, one of Jack's very close colleagues at Indiana University Southeast.
It happened long ago, as it happens now. The trees are bare one day, and the next they wear their leaves in full array, sway and dance in passionel, their limbs above our heads, the bright hair of the forest, birth of new bark, cambium of trees and men. Once again, the scene unfolds in the forest, seated beneath a tree. Orpheus picks the strings, and 100 birds take wing, wheel, circle his radiant head, mate in midair, and come to rest on the boughs all around him. Terpsichore, erato, melpomene, they sing. So those are some lines from one of Jack's poems titled Metamorphic Equinox, from this collection titled The Future Past, that was published in 1980, and that Jack gave to me literally on the day that I met him. He handed me this. This was at Jack and Nancy's house after our annual department retreat, which at the time we held at Clifty Falls. This was in 2012. We would meet there for a long day, do some long-term planning, and then retire to Jack and Nancy's house for the best appetizers that I think I've ever eaten, if ever you've been treated to those. I worked alongside Jack from that year, from 2012 until he retired in 2020. We remained in touch a little bit after that. Most recently, when Jack was putting together one of the videos that you saw a clip from, where he's reading from Keats and reading from Shelley and talking about how much they meant to him. And one of the things I learned from that video is how much Shelley, in particular, meant to him during those Vietnam years, when he was working through the decision of how to respond when his draft number came up. He had sent me the link to ask me to review the video and kind of speak to the publisher about its educational value, and I was happy to do so because it was apparent. I chose those lines from that poem for a couple of reasons. One is that they offer an image of renewal. The poem opens by talking about bare trees, the likes of which all of us drove past on our way here. But it looks forward to a springtime and offers us various images of rebirth. It explains all of that in terms of the myth of Orpheus, whose songs, according to the myth, made possible a sense of an ever-present spring, a spring that never turned to winter. In giving us that image, Jack, I'm 99% confident, was drawing from Ovid. And I think I figured out in preparation for this that the title, Metamorphic Equinox, is in fact a reference to Ovid. And that's another reason why I picked that poem to read from. I noted this about Jack's poetry, about this collection, when I first read it in 2012, and I noted it again in preparation for this. Jack is an extraordinarily allusive poet, allusive with an A, a poet who makes frequent reference to other poets. That's the Ovid's, Ovid's Orpheus is whom we're encountering in that poem. The lines that I read, they end with an invocation of 3 of the 9 muses: Terpsichore, who is the muse of dance, Erato, the muse of lyric poetry and love, and Melpomene, the muse of tragedy. And I'm going to admit that I had to look Melpomene up. And I'm an educated reader, but this is not uncommon in reading Jack's poetry. He sent me to the internet about every 10, 15 lines to look up a reference that I either just didn't recognize or only had the faintest memory of from my own undergraduate days. And I thought about what it must have been like for someone like me to have read him in 1980 when this collection was first published. I would have had to have spent 3 days in the library just to know all the references. But that's not a bad thing for a poet to inspire in a reader. Rereading him now, I noted something that I may not have recognized 12 years ago, but I see it now because of things that I've been teaching more recently. At least in this collection, The Future Past, Jack was a modernist. The speaker of his poems is very similar to the speaker we find in poems by Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, someone who believes the world has lost its way, but who believes that literature in general and poetry in particular have the power to restore a sense of order and purpose and meaning. If we read the classics, and if you're Jack, you allude to the classics in your own poetry to remind us that humanity has been through times like these before, and we've survived. And that's tied in with the theme of renewal. This view of poetry, this modernist view of poetry, it's the responsibility of the poet to keep alive the wisdom of their predecessors, to breathe new life into old words, using new words of your own. I wish I had figured that out about Jack's poetry in time to run it by him and ask him whether I had read him right. I think I know him well enough to believe that he would appreciate my pointing it out now. I think I know that. Over the years, I learned, and it's continued today, that there was a lot that I didn't know about the man, but was delighted to learn, and sometimes, as it just happened twice, knocked off my chair when I learned first about his connections to the avant-garde film scene in New York, although I had never seen a picture of the insect until now. But then again, he was friends with Joe Walsh. He was there at the origins of Devo. Isaac Asimov paid him a compliment. This is what I've learned in the past 20 minutes. Jack was IU Southeast's version of the most interesting man in the world. The Citizen Kane of what was the? I wrote it down, or maybe I didn't. The Citizen Kane of the underground. Jack was the Forrest Gump of the counterculture. He was there. He was the next person over when all of this was going down. See, that's an insight from about 25 minutes ago. All of that makes me regret I never saw Jack teach, and I hope that his students saw some of these sides of him. What I will remember Oh, no, I'm sorry. One more thing I wanted to point out on the subject of the most interesting man in the world, and this is something I realized on the drive here, because I had the Future Past cover down, back cover up, in the passenger side of my car, and this is one of the images that was up on the slideshow earlier. It's the one of Jack. I'm going to describe it as short Art Garfunkel hair, with the open collar, wearing the vest, standing against a wall, kind of hips, one higher than the other, cigarette between his fingers. I've seen this image for years and thought that he was the most interesting man in the world. But I had not realized until earlier today, and I don't know, those of you that are seated here will be able to appreciate this. Do you see the image of Walt Whitman, the frontispiece? The frontispiece from the 1855 edition of Everyone Should, when we're moving about again, come up and take a copy of The Future Past and hold it up next to the image of Whitman, the frontispiece from the first edition of Leaves of Grass. It cannot be accidental, the shirt collar, the hips, the posture, that Jack was presenting himself as something of a later day Whitman. I will remember Jack as the images that will come to mind, and you saw a couple of them in the slideshow. He was the MC of our annual department gala that we would hold each year to recognize the winners, the various winners of our student writing contests, scholarship competitions. Jack was in his element as MC, something that, based on what I've learned from Nancy's presentation, that he was in his element as a performer, and we were getting to glimpse some of that when he would host that event. Jack always began that event by reciting from memory the opening lines of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. That became a tradition. When Jack retired, I inherited the tradition of being the MC of the gala, and I've kept tradition alive by opening that event, by reading one or another passage, usually from Whitman, once from Emily Dickinson, but mostly from Whitman. And when I've done that, I've invoked Jack's name to say this is a tradition he began, and that I will continue. And I look forward to doing that in the future. Jack would begin the gala with the opening words of Song of Myself. I'm going to end with the closing lines and say that I always get choked up when I read these stanzas. It's not just now, although it may be more now. These are lines about death, but also lines about the sense of renewal that we find in nature and in poetry. This is Whitman signing off after 1,200 plus lines of poetry about himself. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drifted in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you, nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you.
Thank you. Jack's good friend, Bill Whitaker, from the old days, drove all the way from Akron to share some of his stories about Jack from the early days at Kent State. And I have asked Bill to censor some of them, since it was a very different time back then, and I don't know, so we'll see what he does, okay.
I understand Nancy's concern. However, I have absolutely nothing to say. After listening to the thorough discussion and thorough talking about Jack's life, especially in the Kent State years, she covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover. There are, however, a few things I can talk about. One of them is how I met Jack. I met Jack in 1965. I arrived at Kent State to go to school there. I had been told to call because I knew nobody there. So I had been told by a friend of mine who lived elsewhere to call this woman who lived very close to Kent and had been her roommate at another college. And so I called that friend, and the friend said, "Oh yeah, sure, let's go out and I'll show you around, and how about Friday?" And so Friday comes, and off we go, and she takes me to this club in Akron called the Townhouse. And she introduced me to a number of people, and one of them was Jack Ramey. So, hi, Jack. Hello, Jack. Nice to meet you. But I don't have much to say to him. It's a club that's loud and dancing, but it was fun. It was a nice time. Next week, she calls me back and says, "Hey, you want to go out again? I'm going to show you around." Yeah, right back to the same club, right back to Jack Ramey. And the third time she did, I said, "I will go. But I want you to understand, I already know the only reason you want me to go is that you want to make Jack Ramey jealous." And she confessed. That was true. About 6 months later, I was working in a bar and a restaurant that had live jazz on the weekends. And I hadn't seen Jack except for those very brief encounters at the Townhouse. And by the way, the Townhouse, years later, when I finished law school, was above the Townhouse was my first office. Totally coincidental, but so at any rate, anyway, so I see him come in sit at a table at this where jazz music is playing, and I reintroduce myself, and Jack, how you doing? You remember? Yeah, and then he did, and said, "Oh yeah." From there, I started seeing him around campus, and we ended up having a large number of classes together, mostly in philosophy and anthropology. And so the 206 Bones, and the discussion about that was something that I saw some of the very early beginnings of. We had an anthropology class, and we loved the teacher. She was wonderful. And she came in one day and gave us a skull, which was a Neanderthal skull. And she said, "Write a report on it." And we were thrilled. It was exciting. We were really looking forward to it. And so we did. Meanwhile, we walked around campus, and we had the skull there, and he would, wax on about it. And it was just a great time, and that was a great fun thing. So that was pretty much how it was going. That was the early days, and as you say, it was the early. In fact, I was going to start off by saying Jack Ramey, the early days, but since half of that had already been covered, I didn't. But anyway, that was. But at the same time, Jack used to work in a motel at night, and he would do the audit, and then he would have 4 hours where he could sleep or study. And one time I went with him. We had been out in Kent in the evening, and it was time for him to go to work and do the night audit, but he had probably had just one or too many drinks that it was going to be a problem. So I said I'd go with him and help him, and he'd just have to guide me. And we did that, and I actually learned how to do it, and I said, this is a great job for a college student. We work 4 hours, and then you sleep 4 hours or study 4 hours. You just got time and get paid for it. So I eventually got a job someplace else. It was a much larger hotel, and they needed 2 people to do the audit, so Jack came back and did that to me. and came back and then worked with me for the second, as the second person there. And we had a ball working together all night. I remember Sgt. Pepper's came out during the period we were working there, Sgt. Pepper's came out one night, and he brought the album into work. So as soon as we got the audit done, we just set it up to listen to, and we were listening to it for hours. And we were listening to this part where if you remember the album, there's a part of it where you really do hear animal sounds. And there's dogs barking and horses and all these kinds of things. And we're laughing, we're listening to it, playing it over again. And we look up, and the milkman that delivers the milk to the hotel we don't know how long he was standing there, but he was watching us, and he just went, "Oh my God." But that was a lot of fun. I got fired from that place because I went to the March on Washington, the March on the Pentagon in Washington, and Jack went with me. But I got fired because even though I had the days off, the manager of the hotel did not want a communist working for him. And so he was against the people that were against the war. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, and he said, "You're fired." And so Jack said, "I'm going too." and we left, and they had nobody to do the audit. So I got fired, he quit, and so that was the end of our, no, that wasn't the end of our motel career. We also then went and worked at the same place on alternate nights a little later. But at some point, the culture took over, and there were a lot of other things to do, and we were not in the motel business anymore. But this is the part where I have to be careful based on the wife. But I am going to be careful. And by the way, even saying that, all of you who know Jack know that there's nothing really bad. He had a lot of fun, and he really learned how to absorb it. And one of the things I was going to talk about too were all the people that we were around. Kent was a wonderful place to be at that time for just the kinds of things that you were mentioning, and everybody was liking the fact that Joe Walsh was there and Devo, and so we did know all these people. We went to parties with all these people. In addition to that, there was a great arts community and the poetry readings. I was at the poetry reading that Nancy was talking about when she showed up with Linda Like, whose artwork, by the way, is on the cover of The Future Past. And so they were friends, and they came I was in Walters, which was a bar, but they let it out for poetry readings and stuff. It was a dive bar, but they liked to do that, and they were open to having poetry readings. And Jack was featured that night, and he was really on fire. He was so good, and as you could hear, he was as good as he was many years later. He just had that natural, beautiful voice. And so then a couple of days later, Nancy says, "Tell me what you know about Jack Ramey." And so it was a while before they really got together. But she got her man, and that was a wonderful thing. In the meanwhile, and really, what the collaboration, his muse, the things they did together, I think was so helpful to Jack. I think it really, in many ways, really, I think got his career going, got his career under control. And you were also his manager. And so it was really a wonderful collaboration. And I think it obviously it meant all the world to Jack. So let's see if I do have anything else. I know. Yes, I have the one story that I had to get special permission to tell you. And that was, really, it was a magical time. And we say these things about Kent, but it was a magical time. It's every now and then in a certain geographic location, there seems to be a lot of creativity that came out of it. And that was the time in Kent. But there were all other things going on as well. And Jack, one of the things, there were all magical things happening too. Jack and Danny Miller. Now, Danny Miller you saw in one of the pictures up here. He was a guy with the Oregon hat on, the little green O. And he is a filmmaker. And very successful filmmaker. He's made a lot of films. He's got Emmy Awards. He's done great stuff. The film that is sort of most prominent, at least in our minds, is called Fire in the Heartland, the Kent State story. And so he did that. He did a movie that is really, as far as we're concerned, the definitive movie of what happened at Kent State and the buildup in the years that we're just talking about now as well. But at that time, Danny hadn't done any films, and he and Jack were hanging out, and they decided they were going to hitchhike to California. And they wanted to go to Haight-Ashbury because they wanted to be a part. We had that at Kent, but they wanted to go to the epicenter of the culture at that time. And the only way they could get there was hitchhike. So they hitchhiked. Right within 10 minutes, they got picked up by a guy in a blue Cadillac, convertible. And they hopped in the car, and the first thing he did was take out a flask and give them some bourbon out of the flask, and off they went. And this ride got them all the way to Chicago. And the guy was going to a blues club. He was a blues musician. And so he said, where do you want to get off? And they said, well, we'll go to the club. And they got off at the club. At the club, some of the people there that they talked to said, let them sleep on their house. Go to our house and let them sleep on the floor there. And so that was magic number one. But the next day, they get out and they go hitchhiking. And they get across the country. Of course, all of a sudden, they're in San Francisco, and they have no place to stay. They don't know what they're going to do. They don't have a lot of money. And somebody that they're talking to and know that they don't have a place says, hey, a friend of mine he's out of town, and he asked me if I could find somebody to stay there while he was going. He had gone to Los Angeles. And so he wanted somebody to stay there. So Jack and Danny got to stay in this house. And it turns out the house was owned, and the person that wanted staying there was R. Crumb. Now, many of you may remember R. Crumb. He was a cartoonist back in the day, and a movement cartoonist, very famous, very successful. And so that was their first. That was another magical step. But then, and this is the part I have to be careful about, they decided that they were going to buy some psilocybin to take with them, because they were going to hitchhike back to Woodstock, and that's what they did. So they got this. Somebody gave them the name of a lady. They said, you go over to her house, knock on the door, she'll come in and talk to her, and she'll sell you some psilocybin that you can take to Woodstock and sell there at Woodstock too. So then you'd have some money. So they knock on the door, and the woman answers, and it turns out the woman is the mother of Richie Havens. Magical. I mean, it really was a magical time. But Richie Havens, also, they didn't know this, but when they got to Woodstock, Richie Havens was the opening act at Woodstock, and Richie Havens is, of course, one of the great all-time rhythm guitarist, and he was fabulous. So they get there and he opens the show and they got Mom's mescaline, which they did sell. But it seemed like Danny had to do a lot of the work because Jack was off talking to people all the time. You know, he would talk to anybody. And so one day they had got separated, and Danny wanted to find him. It took him hours. You know, just all the hundreds of thousands of people that were there, and he had to find Jack amongst all those people. And he did find him. And there was a group of Hell's Angels, and Jack was sitting in the middle of this group of Hell's Angels, waxing on and talking to them. And he gets up, and so Danny says, "Come on, we gotta go." And he gets up, and they all give him a hug, and off he goes. There were all kinds of people that he was able to be friends with. But it was, they were tired. They hadn't been up late, but they had been up late. They weren't sleeping. And somehow they went back, and they got down right to the front of the stage. And at the front of the stage, they're waiting for the next act to come out. And the next act turned out to be, while they were leaning on the stage, Jimi Hendrix. Really. They looked at each other and said, "Will it never stop?" So they had a wonderful time. But then he goes back and everything explodes from there as far as his career and as far as his poetry. And he continued to do it. So I was glad I was there at that fateful and impactful day at Walter's Bar when Nancy got the spark and Jack ended up getting together. It was fateful. Yeah, I was going to ask you. Yeah, right here, yeah. No, I was going to ask you, was that night? Oh, yeah. I'm glad. Yeah, it was a major night. Major reason why we're all here. But at any rate, I want to tell you, and I wrote it down, so I didn't write it down. Danny Miller wanted to come. He was really sad that he couldn't. He wanted me to, actually he sent me 8 pages that he wanted me to share with everybody, but Nancy said we probably won't do that. Where is it here? Because it says something about Jack. What did I do with it? Oh, there it is. So he said they got back from all of the hitchhiking, and Danny talks about how Jack related to everybody that we picked up. And Jack was in his, and this is what he says, and that's why I want to read it to you. And Jack was in his element, so charming. He was open to conversation, inquisitive about each person and family we encountered. He certainly left every one of them glad that they had stopped to pick us up. He had a poem for every occasion, when called for. His own, others ranging from Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, to Keats, Shelley, Dylan Thomas, and Kerouac. And that's true. And reading that reminds me of what I think is one of the highest compliments that you can pay to a person. And Jack was the embodiment of it. And that is somebody that is interesting and interested. And he was. His own ego wasn't so much that he was all I this, I that. He wanted to know about other people. He wanted to become a part of what they could tell him. And I thought that, I really do think that that's one of the highest compliments you can pay. And I think Jack was the embodiment of that. So, at any rate, I think that's as far as I'm going. We had it, but I guess I do want to say one other thing about the Oh, I know what it was. There was one other thing about the skull. I want to go back to the part about the skull that we carried around. And hearing all of how the bones are so important, but also it tells me a little bit about loss, too. I was reading a book a few months ago, Rachel Kushner's latest book, which is Creation Lake. And in it, she talks about, one of the characters writes about Neanderthal people and has a whole theory about them. And I thought about Jack, and I was going to call him and tell him about this, but by the time I got done the book, I had gotten the email from Nancy telling me that he had passed. And so it reminded me of the loss. And one of the things about loss is that you want to be able, you forget sometimes that person is gone, and I need to call Jack and talk to him about that. And I think that happens a lot, and I think that will happen. But also, what we have here is Jack's going to be around for a very, very long time. And his brilliance and his empathy and what he did is going to remain a part of all of us for a very long time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. And now we'll have the guest tributes. If any of the rest of you would like to share any memories. No? No? Okay, so, well, going, no? It's Diane from IUS.
I don't have any notes or anything with me, but I had, I would say, the privilege of working with Jack as writing program administrator at Indiana University Southeast. And as everybody has heard, Jack was an absolutely fascinating person, very, very interesting. And I just wanted to say just a few things, just little stories about the time that I worked with Jack. I think it would be fair to say that Jack had a certain humility about him. He did all of these things, these very interesting things, but he never really bragged about it. He never thought of it as, this makes me, a really important person. He was just very humble and kind of maybe matter of fact about the experiences that he had had. One of the things that I will never forget is Jack's humor. I don't know that I ever knew anybody, unless it was my own immediate brothers and sisters, who had the sense of humor that Jack had, sometimes because I think he told things the way they were. He would sometimes just come out and say what he thought about something, but he said it in such a way that it was just hilarious. And so I spent so much time, those years that I worked with him, laughing, just laughing my head off, basically. And it could be anything from him saying, wait till they find out what a fraud I am, to saying something like, well, heck, and I don't think he said heck, I might as well stay here all night. And I would just be laughing. We would be busy trying to come up with a schedule for the classes or something like that, and just be having a few little obstacles along the way. And he would invariably say something that would just have me basically in stitches. I would also like to say that Jack was a very thoughtful person. And a little story that kind of shows that. I was working with him on something we needed to do for the program, and I told, it was close to Christmas time. I told him that my son, my little boy, wanted an Indianapolis Colts lanyard for Christmas. He collected these little lanyards, and I couldn't find one. And Jack said, "Oh, I know where I could find one of those," or something of that nature. I thought, well, there aren't any in Kentucky. And we left it at that, and I didn't think about it again. A couple of weeks later, I happened to be going into the building, and I met Jack coming out. And he had a little brown bag in his hand, and he handed it to me. This happened to be the year that Jack was sick. He said he had gone out to get some gifts for his family. While he was there, he remembered my little boy wanted an Indianapolis Colts lanyard, and so he bought it and handed it to me. And of course, he would not take any payment for it. I remember just standing there thinking, I can't believe that he remembered that and took the time to go and get that. And so my little boy got a gift from Jack that year. I recall my son took a summer camp at Hanover College. While we were there, I said, "You know what, you guys need to come over to my boys." I had come to pick them up, and I said, "You need to meet Jack." And I knew they would love Jack's garden. So I called Jack and I said, are you at home? Are you and Nancy there? And he said, "Yes, come on over." So I took the boys over there, and he showed us his garden. And I hope everybody here has had the opportunity to see that beautiful garden that Jack and Nancy have there. It just beautiful. And so this morning I told the boys, I said, I'm going to, they're not boys now, they're young men. I told them that I'm going to Jack's celebration of life. They said, "Oh yes, I remember his garden and his archery skills." Just to a little story about how Jack has touched the lives of a lot of people, and in small ways. Very interesting person. He did tell me some stories about his time at Woodstock, and he told me about his hitchhiking across the country. I'm thinking to myself, wow, what an interesting life. Me being a farm girl from Kentucky and having never been outside of the state much. And he's telling me about Woodstock and hitchhiking across California. I'm thinking, this is so great, you've got to write a book about this, Jack. Have you started that book? He said, "Now don't tell anybody about this. Don't tell anybody. They don't know about that here." And so I have never told anybody. And I want to say that, for last words, that he had, I think, other than a very fascinating life, but also two things that everybody should have, which is books and a garden. Jack had those, and I will throw in a third, a sense of humor that was worth seeking out. So, thank you.
All right, so would anyone else like to speak? Well, if not, there's still plenty of food back there and plenty of drinks, so help yourself, and I'll talk with you individually.